everyone. This is Dr. Sharon Brown, Executive Director of the Tampa Bay Healthcare Collaborative. And earlier today, we had our annual/quarterly meeting entitled Impact versus Intention, the Importance of Collaboration when Dismantling Racism in Healthcare. We had a dynamic speaker. She's here with us again, Dr. Deborah Stroman of the Gillings School of Public Health at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Did I get all those words out correctly?
Absolutely.
And we ran over time, wanted to honor your time, those of you who attended, but then also wanted to get your questions in as promised. So Dr. Stroman is back to answer those questions that we did not get to earlier today. So I'm just going to jump in. Some of them were actually follow-up questions from some that you answered earlier, so we might touch a little bit on that. And there was one in particular, I was wondering if you wanted to say more now that we have a little bit more time, because we were like strapped for time earlier. So let's jump in. Teresa Kelly asked, how do we balance the fact that race is a construct, yet we use those demographics to illustrate disparities?
So it is not a matter of balancing. In fact, when I hear balancing, I always think about how we talk about balancing our time management. That's an old way of thinking. We need to think about blending. We need to blend. And again, this is a part of white culture where we often have binary thinking, either or, black and white. We need to think about how we can integrate and work them together. And so again, race is real and it's not real. And so when we talk about on an interpersonal relationship, we think about race, we see our differences, we acknowledge that, and we lift them up. And then when we talk about trying to do the dismantling, the deconstruction of racism, and then we want to lift up race, and we want to see it so that we can identify it and so that we can do the surgery, we can do the work that's necessary to change the outcomes. So it's not a matter of trying to balance, let's blend. And when it's needed and we need to go there, we have to. But in general, in terms of trying to move forward with relationships, we can't get stuck. Yeah.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, yes, it is a construct that was created, and I believe you said the founding of our country, or the 15th century. I believe you said in the 15th century earlier.
So I was talking about the importance of understanding, and this is Debbie Stroman, my model, about religion, about science, and how the law all works together to uphold this structural racism. But in terms of when these were started, we can go all the way back to the science and the classification system that started separating people, that people just built upon, and here we are today.
Believing it.
You know,
go ahead, I'm sorry, go ahead.
In an ideal world, we will always see difference. But the difference is that we will acknowledge the beauty and we will celebrate the difference. Right now, this lake that we swim in, this toxic lake, the difference is now used as a wedge to pull us apart. Right.
Yeah. And so then, as I was saying, while it is a construct, so it's real, but it's not real. So while it is a construct and not real, we still need to be able to use the data to help dismantle.
Exactly.
There we go. All right. Just wanted to get that clear. Thank you for that, Teresa. Our next question is from Erica Braham. And again, I'm hoping I'm saying your name correctly. And it was following Anna's question about social media. Remember earlier she asked if social media propagates the structural racism. So Erica followed up by asking, to what extent does social media contribute to echo chambers that reinforce structural racism?
So social media is just an advancement in technology. And so before social media, we still communicated in ways that celebrated people and also broke people down. And so you're always going to have platforms that are used for good and not so good. So there's nothing new here. It only makes sense that if you're using social media to advance a cause, there's going to be a subset, there's going to be a subchamber of people who will say, yes, let's go with that and let's think about it from this perspective. And on that same thought, if you're using social media for negative things, then there's going to be people who will go ahead and take that and run with it as well. So it's not the platform, it's not the medium, it's the thoughts, it's the mindset that's driving it. People just use this as a tool.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And if you have the stomach for it, then stay in there and take it. Others limit, there are some people, in this space where you go read an article that has something to do with race and racism, you run the risk to read the comments. Sometimes I lose myself and I decide to read the comments, and then I end up breathing very heavy and telling myself to don't respond.
Yep.
And some people say, nope, I can't take those comments. I'm not going there. So again, that's all about, how you decide to use the platform.
Definitely have to be mindful of how I use the platform, because like you, there are times when I have to say to myself, stop, turn it off. And I deliberately have to tell myself, go and find something that brings you joy or that makes you laugh. Okay. Otherwise, we'll get pulled down into those negative emotions. And when we try to do this work from that place, nothing good can come from that. We're only perpetuating more negativity. So great answer. Some of these are comments. I'm going to read the comments to you, and if you want to respond to the comment, then do so. So this one is from Dr. Kamisha Gavidone, and she said, thanks for including the piece on mental health and incarceration. It also correlated based on funding. Increased funding for prison is correlated with decreased spending on mental health. Mm-hmm. So that was one. All right, here's another if you want to respond to it. Dr. Biles, she says, this is, and I told her I would read it, I'd let you know, the comments were made. She says, this is amazingly horrific. This is when you were sharing the data. I was already struggling with Mr. Floyd's murder, and this just magnifies my struggle. And white Western medicine wants to know why our blood pressure is higher than theirs.
Mm-hmm. So again, very real. We are in crisis mode. People like to dance around it and not believe it's really happening, but this is falling on people in different ways. And it's very traumatic. It is enough to paralyze you and not want you to get out of bed. But certainly, with the privilege that we have with degrees and being associated with the collaborative, all of that, that we have a responsibility to do the best that we can. Not always perfect, but do the best that we can lead in this space. But do take time for radical self-care. And I said radical, coming from Audre Lorde, and how sometimes the self-care has been, again, co-opted into go burn your candles and do your affirmations and journal and not think about anybody else. She was talking about radical self-care, which means community and connecting with people and lifting people up and acknowledging, what we're going through, but it's community focused.
Thank you for sharing that. Earlier, you answered a question from Mark Trujillo, and I'm asking it again only because I know I've had a little bit more time to talk to you about this, and there might be a bit more you want to say to it. So I'm going to ask the question again in case you'd like to add. His question was, how do we address cultural eating factors that contribute to health disparities while showing respect to dietary preference that were formed under inequity and continue to be reinforced by food industries targeting minority neighborhoods? For instance, beverages like designer water versus soda and juice with high fructose corn syrup and sugar.
And so again, this goes back to, we have to make the decision that we have to come to an understanding that what has worked in the past is not working. Mm-hmm. And so do you want to continue to go down the path of identifying the problematic behaviors of individuals or communities? Or do you want to move to looking at the structural racism, the institutional, the systemic things that are happening to communities. And so again, I encourage people to please consider what are the systems, what is happening that's causing people to have this continued behavior.
Mm. So yes, it's important to look at the food because the food does have an impact on our body, but go
Absolutely.
beyond the food.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and
Where is the greed? Where is the fear? Where is the greed and the fear that continues to create harmful products?
mm,
That's where we need it. That's where the protest, the disruption, the innovation needs to happen in those spaces.
okay.
Are we saying that a particular community really wants to eat a lot of sugar each and every day? Is that what we're saying?
Mm,
Is there a group, there's a community that doesn't want to move their body and doesn't want to not be obese? Is that what we're saying? But when we go into these opportunities to work, to serve, and we go in that with the mindset they really don't want to change, then I think we're broken.
mm.
People want to choose life.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Thanks. All right. Uh, let's see. This next question, please forgive me if I am saying your name incorrectly. I am making my best attempt. Is from Mo Chiodini. Mo asks, are there any community examples that we can study to help us create our plans?
So yes, yes, and no. A lot of the people who are doing this work and having great success, it's been documented, but they're not ones to run around with a banner and say, look what I've done.
Uh-huh.
And that we know how systems and institutions work. You're not going to acknowledge that as much for whatever reason. And so there are communities, we can talk offline. I can talk to you, Dr. Brown, and give you some examples.
Okay.
But there are communities, there are groups, there are organizations that have shifted their thinking. They've received and embrace of racial analysis. Again, it's one thing to read articles, read a book, but to actually have an analysis as to how we got to where we are and what are the underlying principles that we have to make sure that we bring into every space. That's different leadership. And that's what we need more of. And it is happening. It is happening all across the country. Is it moving at the pace that that we would like? I would probably say no, but it is moving. It's moving that way. We see more and more people across the country, especially young people, who want to have an analysis, who want to, they're shaking their heads. Why is this happening? Why are we continuing to have these tragedies? Why are we continuing to have these worse outcomes? There must be a better way.
Yeah.
And that is definitely happening. I mean, look at us right now, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we're engaged in this and we're talking about it. We're thinking of different ways to collaborate and different ways to challenge the system.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So this question wasn't asked, but I feel like it may be triggered in someone, so I'm going to ask it on their behalf. I know that you believe, and I believe as well, that understanding the history of how we got here in the first place. I love when you were talking about the Caucasoid Mountains and the skeletons and all of that. I need your history books. But in understanding the history, once we can then uncover the foundations that lay under the belief systems, right? So once we do that, then we're able to dismantle that way, right? Is that why you think it's important to understand the history? I told you what I think, but I'm asking that is.
So again, if you just talk about people having a particular behavior, and as any type of professional, whether it's healthcare, whether it's law enforcement, whether it's in education, you want to understand why people are acting the way they do, right? And you always go back to historical performance. And that's how we predict what their next behavior is going to be. And so that means going backwards to go forward. You have to go backwards to go through it. And so again, that's why there's no surprise, because if you look at the history of our country, we are a violent nation. and things were achieved through violence. And when you talk about upholding a system of inequity, then violence will happen. And these outcomes aren't necessarily where you have a group of healthcare professionals killing people in the public with a videotape, people filming it. No, the killing occurs in terms of not receiving access to the right tests. The killing occurs not being able to have the necessary surgery that you need. The killing occurs when you don't give the right nutritional information, right? And again, you don't have to believe me. Look at what the data says. Worst outcomes are happening for people of color, in particular Black people. And so the history is critical. I mean, in fact, it goes with the study of medicine. We look at the pathology. How did things start? How have they evolved? And so race and racism is no different. You must go to the history to understand how we got to where we are and where we're going to go if we don't disrupt.
That's good. That leads right into another question that Erica had. Erica asked if it's possible to share the references that were on your slides, specifically the references on history. Is that something that you
again, I mentioned my website. I have a lot of information there, dstroman.com.
Say that again. Say it again.
My website, dstroman.com. But again, if you just Google race and racism history, to the organizations, to the institutes that you believe are honorable and trying to do the right thing, then you will see all of this. This is all in the public square, but you must do your own homework. You know, everything from the Zinn, right? Howard Zinn, one of the greatest social community activists. He has an entire educational system, educational curriculum around race and racism. The most fundamental book that I encourage people to read is The United States, The People's History of the United States.
Yes.
And you can go online and read this. And that will take you a while to read. And you're going to highlight and go back. Yeah. Dr. Kamara Jones, who I mentioned, again, you can just Google, this stuff is there. Yeah.
It's there. So then
here's call it hidden in plain view.
Here's a question. Yes. Look, you and I, we are readers. Everybody's not a reader. So if we want to start bringing in other minds who aren't typically in this conversation, have you, or how would you recommend we bring them in? They're not going to go on Google and search. They're not going to read that thick 1,000-page book. How would you recommend, or how have you brought in other minds into the conversation who will not go ahead and do the reading?
Well, back to my point, you're not trying to serve everybody. You're not trying to convince people. If people are interested in change, then you're going to have to do your work. No one's going to, just lay out a platter and say, hey, and anoint you as now someone who is the anti-racist. You're going to have to do the work. And so I'm not trying to make it easy for anybody. The pain is real. The deaths are real. And so you have to be willing to do the work. Now, again, technology has made it easy for us. And so you can now get a book and just hear the author speak it, right? Now you can go watch Brian Stevenson on a video, Kamara Jones, Dr. Jones on a video. You know, there's so many ways to receive this now because of the advances in technology, but the work remains the work.
So your answer reminds me of when you're wanting to create a tipping point. You find the people who are interested, and according to the
well, they will be attracted to you.
Yeah,
you don't have to find
and so according to the theory of the tipping point, you get 15% of whatever that population is that you're trying to reach, and that's enough to get the ball moving. So you do your thing, they're drawn to you, you continue to do it, you get to that tipping point, and then you can start to see movement. According to the tipping point and what you are saying, it's not about exerting a lot of energy with trying to convince other people. It's just keep doing your part, creating awareness, having the conversations, bringing the people together, doing whatever the work is in this space, the collaborative work that we'll be doing. And as we do that, we'll draw others in.
If you are disrupting, if
Mhm.
you are bringing innovation to a space, if you're asking questions about upstream, then people will notice that difference and they'll start saying, what's going on with Tampa Bay Healthcare Collaborative?
All right.
And as Dr. Maya Angelou stated so eloquently, do the work such that people can't take their eyes off of you.
All right.
Do the work. People will be drawn, they will be attracted to you because it's different, it's new. Because remember, the other stuff is not working. That's why we're doing this.
Mm-hmm.
What has been done in the past is not working. Do the data on Tampa Bay, disaggregate by race, and you'll see that what is happening in Texas, in Chicago, in California is similar to what's happening in Tampa Bay. It's not working. So that's why we need this time where we have to do a shift.
Yeah, and I know data has been collected, particularly through Unite Pinellas, is who I'm thinking of right now. Listen.
So the data, if you have the data, then you're in phase 2. How do you
Mm-hmm.
analyze that data with a racial lens now?
Mm-hmm.
That's the difference, because people have data. We've been collecting data for what, a century?
Right.
But now how are we analyzing it? Are we saying, look at this particular health outcome? Why is this happening? It can't be because of this particular behavior. It has to be something else that is going on. And that's where you want to start asking those tougher questions.
I thank you for your time.
Thank you. I enjoyed being with Tampa Bay Healthcare Collaborative, and hopefully soon, not rush, but soon we will be able to be together face to face. Thank you.
One more thing, because a question did come in and it reminded me of something you and I talked about. So I'd like for it to come out of your mouth. Someone asked, so, and I'm paraphrasing, they asked, so what now? What are our next steps? What is our call to action? That was the question.
So that is for you. It's the
yes,
collaborative.
I got that part, but I think remember when you and I were in, when you were presenting for the Racial Equity Institute, and the question was asked, so what do we do now? We leave this meeting and do what? And your answer, I appreciate it, because it was about not always rushing to action. I don't want to botch up what you said.
Sure. So, I'm reminded of Albert Einstein, the great theorist, physics and space and energy, who said that if he had 60 minutes to solve a problem, he would take 55 minutes to study it first. Mm-hmm. And so we are so, excited to go ahead and go fix something versus doing our own work and studying and understanding the history and how it applies today and how it's just shifted a bit, but it's still the same things. I call it rinse and repeat. Mm-hmm. And so in terms of, jumping into action, the action just started by your being a participant in the workshop. Your action started by reading an article. Your action started by having a conversation with someone. That is the action before you go off and try to fix something. And so the work has already begun. And so you must continue to do the work.
All right. Dr. Stroman, I look forward to first of all, when we can all come together face to face, but your continued participation with us as we move forward. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for this extra time that we did not originally plan for. And I'm very grateful to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.